The rain had been falling since dawn, turning the city into a blur of gray streets and flashing ambulance lights. Inside the crowded hospital, life and death crossed paths every minute. Doctors rushed through the corridors, nurses fought exhaustion, families clung to hope, and somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, a quiet woman pushed an old cleaning cart across the polished floor. No one noticed her. No one knew that every step she took hid a heartbreaking secret that had been buried for years. But one man was about to change everything. He was one of the hospital's most respected doctors, admired for saving lives and feared for his strict discipline. He believed he understood pain because he saw it every day in the emergency room. He had no idea that the greatest suffering in the entire hospital belonged not to the patients in the beds, but to the woman silently cleaning the floors beneath his feet. What happened when their lives collided would leave everyone questioning how often true heroes are ignored simply because they wear ordinary clothes. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can change lives and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this story with someone who believes in compassion, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to people around the world. Every morning before sunrise, Dr. Ethan Carter parked his car in the same corner of the hospital parking lot. His reputation had been built over 15 years of relentless work. Patients trusted him without hesitation, young doctors admired his skill, and hospital administrators praised his dedication. Yet behind the calm expression he wore every day was a man carrying invisible loneliness. His parents had passed away within months of each other years earlier, and since then, the hospital had become more than his workplace. It had become his home. Saving strangers gave him purpose, but when the long shifts ended, silence always waited for him. At almost the same hour every morning, another employee entered through the service entrance at the back of the hospital. Her name was Emily Harper. She wore a faded housekeeping uniform, tied her dark hair neatly under a simple cap, and carried herself with quiet dignity despite the heavy bucket and cleaning supplies she pushed from one hallway to another. Many staff members barely remembered her name. To most people she was simply the maid, someone whose presence was only noticed when a floor sparkled or a trash bin had been emptied. Few realized she often skipped lunch to help elderly visitors find the right department or comfort frightened children while their parents met with doctors. Emily had learned long ago that people rarely looked into the eyes of someone wearing a cleaning uniform. They looked past her, around her, sometimes even through her. Yet she never allowed bitterness to settle in her heart. Every smile she offered carried warmth. Every patient she greeted received genuine kindness. She believed that no act of compassion was ever wasted, even if no one thanked her. One particularly exhausting afternoon, the emergency department overflowed with accident victims after a massive highway collision. Stretchers crowded every corridor. Nurses hurried from room to room. Doctors barely had time to breathe. Dr. Ethan Carter had been on his feet for nearly 12 hours when he finally stepped into the hallway outside the operating rooms. His shoulders ached, his hands trembled slightly from fatigue, and his thoughts blurred together. As he leaned briefly against the wall, he noticed someone quietly placing bottles of water beside the exhausted nurses without interrupting their work. It was Emily. She wasn't assigned to care for the staff. She simply noticed their exhaustion and used her own break to help. She disappeared before anyone could thank her. The small gesture lingered in Ethan's mind longer than he expected. Days passed, and he found himself noticing her more often. She was always helping someone. She picked up a little girl's dropped teddy bear before surgery and carefully cleaned it so the child would have it afterward. She gently covered an elderly patient with a blanket when no nurse happened to be nearby. She patiently listened to worried relatives who only needed someone willing to hear their fears for a few minutes. None of these moments were dramatic enough to make headlines. No awards recognized them. Yet they quietly transformed the atmosphere around her. Ethan began wondering what kind of person remained so gentle in a place filled with suffering every day. One evening he stayed unusually late after performing a difficult surgery. Most of the lights in one wing of the hospital had already been dimmed. The hallways echoed with distant footsteps and the soft humming of cleaning machines. As he walked toward the exit, he noticed Emily kneeling beside an old wheelchair, carefully repairing its broken footrest with a small screwdriver she had borrowed from the maintenance department. She wasn't required to fix hospital equipment. Calling maintenance would have been easier. But she explained to a passing nurse that another patient might need the wheelchair before morning, and she didn't want anyone to wait. Again, she quietly returned to work without expecting recognition. For the first time in years, Ethan felt genuine curiosity about someone outside his profession. One afternoon, Ethan witnessed something that deeply unsettled him. A wealthy visitor accidentally spilled coffee across the freshly cleaned lobby floor. Instead of apologizing, the visitor harshly criticized Emily for standing nearby, accusing her of being slow and careless. Several people watched silently. Emily quietly cleaned the mess while thanking the visitor for pointing it out, despite having done nothing wrong. Ethan expected to see resentment in her eyes. Instead, he saw sadness. Not anger. Not humiliation. Just a sadness so familiar that it seemed older than the moment itself. It stayed with him all evening. That night, unable to sleep, Ethan replayed the scene repeatedly. He had treated countless broken bones, failing hearts, and traumatic injuries. Yet emotional wounds fascinated him because they often remained invisible. Something inside Emily told him she had survived far more than ordinary hardship. The next morning he found himself watching her from a distance again. She smiled at everyone. She encouraged frightened children with gentle gestures. She comforted grieving relatives with tissues and warm cups of tea. But every time she believed no one was looking, her smile quietly disappeared. It was as though she carried a weight too heavy for anyone else to see. Winter slowly arrived, bringing icy winds and shorter days. The hospital grew busier as seasonal illnesses filled every department. Emily worked overtime almost every week, accepting extra shifts without complaint. Some nights she remained until nearly midnight before catching the last bus home. Ethan wondered why someone so dedicated never seemed to leave early. Then one evening he accidentally discovered the answer. Walking through the staff parking area, he expected to see Emily board the city bus as usual. Instead, he watched her walk several blocks beyond the station toward one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city. Concerned, he kept his distance. She stopped outside a tiny apartment building whose walls showed years of neglect. The roof sagged. Several windows were cracked. Paint peeled from every surface. Emily entered carrying 2 grocery bags. A few minutes later, through the uncovered kitchen window, Ethan saw her preparing dinner for an elderly woman sitting in a wheelchair. The woman appeared frail. Very frail. Emily carefully fed her before eating anything herself. Only then did Ethan realize that after working 12 exhausting hours in the hospital, she returned home to become a full-time caregiver. His heart grew heavy. He quietly left without letting her know he had been there. Back at home, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what he had witnessed. Suddenly, every overtime shift, every tired expression, every hidden tear made more sense. Yet something still didn't fit. Even caring for an elderly parent couldn't fully explain the deep sorrow he had seen in her eyes. There was another story. A much older one. A story she had spent years hiding from the world. And soon, fate would reveal it in the most unexpected way.